The morning sun painted the Nevada hills gold when Dawson Quinn's horse stumbled on a loose stone, sending a sharp pain through the animal's front leg that made the cowboy's heart sink with worry, because a lame horse in this territory meant walking back to Lovelock on foot. He dismounted quickly, running his calloused hands down the mare's leg, feeling for breaks or swelling, when movement in the valley below caught his attention. A woman knelt among the sagebrush and wildflowers, her dark hair catching the light as she moved from plant to plant with practiced efficiency, filling a woven basket with greenery that seemed to glow in the early light. Dawson led his limping mare down the slope, his boots crunching on the dry earth. The woman looked up as he approached, her face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but he could see the wariness in her posture. She stood slowly, one hand resting on the basket, the other pushing back the hat to reveal a face that stopped him in his tracks. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with eyes the color of honey and sun-darkened skin that spoke of hours spent outdoors. "Your horse is favoring that leg," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the isolated location. "Yes, madam. Stepped wrong coming down the ridge." Dawson removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "Name's Dawson Quinn. I work at the Double R Ranch outside Lovelock." "Natalie Coleman," she replied, relaxing slightly. "I live in town with my aunt. She runs the boarding house on Main Street." He glanced at her basket, now noticing the variety of plants she had collected. Some he recognized, others were foreign to him. "What brings you out here so early?" "Harvesting. The morning light is best for certain herbs. The dew keeps them fresh and they haven't been stressed by the afternoon heat." She moved back toward her collection, kneeling again beside a cluster of silver-green leaves. Dawson found himself walking closer, genuinely curious. His mare stood patiently behind him, the reins dragging. "What are you harvesting them for?" "Medicine, mostly. Some for cooking. My aunt taught me everything she learned from her mother, who learned from a Paiute woman years ago. Out here, a doctor can be days away. People need remedies they can trust." Natalie plucked several stems, her fingers deft and careful. "Show me what each one does," Dawson said, surprising himself with the request. He had lived in Nevada for 3 years, and never paid much attention to the plants beyond which ones the cattle avoided, and which ones indicated water nearby. Natalie looked up at him, studying his face as if determining whether his interest was genuine. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she smiled, a real smile that transformed her serious expression into something luminous. "All right then. Sit down, cowboy. This might take a while." He settled onto a flat rock, stretching his long legs out before him. His mare wandered a few feet away to nibble at some grass. Natalie held up a sprig of leaves that looked almost silver in the light. "This is sagebrush, but not the common kind. This variety has stronger properties. We make it into a tea for stomach troubles and headaches. It also helps with fever when brewed strong and mixed with honey." She reached into her basket and pulled out something that looked like dried yellow flowers. "Arnica. This grows higher up in the mountains, but I found a patch last week and dried some. We make it into a salve for bruises and sore muscles. Every ranch hand in the territory should have some." "I could use that right about now," Dawson admitted, rolling his shoulder. "Broke a bronco yesterday that had other ideas about being ridden." "I can make you some," Natalie offered, then seemed to catch herself, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I mean, if you come by the boarding house, we sell remedies." "I'd like that." He watched as she continued her explanation, moving from plant to plant. There was yarrow for wounds, to stop bleeding and prevent infection; mullein for coughs and lung troubles; wild mint for digestion and to freshen breath; juniper berries for urinary ailments and to flavor wild game; Mormon tea for energy and clearing congestion. As she spoke, her voice gained confidence, and Dawson found himself captivated not just by the knowledge she shared but by the passion in her words. This was not some idle hobby. This was her calling, her purpose. She moved through the landscape like she was part of it, knowing instinctively where each plant grew and when to harvest it. "My mother died when I was 12, Natalie said quietly, examining a plant with purple flowers. Pneumonia. The doctor came too late, and even then, his medicines didn't help. My aunt took me in and taught me that we didn't have to be helpless. That nature provided what we needed if we knew where to look and how to use it." "I'm sorry about your mother," Dawson said, meaning it. His own mother was back in Missouri, alive but distant in every way that mattered. It was 10 years ago. The pain fades, but the lesson stays. She placed the purple flowers in her basket. "Penstemon. We use the leaves for minor infections." The sun climbed higher, and Dawson realized he had been sitting there for over an hour, listening to her talk about plants. His mare stood nearby, the leg apparently not as bad as he had feared. But he found himself reluctant to leave, to break this strange spell that had fallen over the morning. "I should let you get back to your work," he finally said, standing and retrieving his hat. "Thank you for the education. I learned more in an hour than I have in 3 years of riding this territory." "Your horse," Natalie said, standing as well. "Let me look at her leg before you go." She approached the mare with the same confidence she had shown with the plants, running her hands down the leg with gentle expertise. "It's a strain, not a break. Keep her to a walk on the way back. I have a liniment that will help." She reached into a smaller pouch attached to her belt and pulled out a small jar. "Rub this into the muscle twice a day for a week. It has arnica and comfrey root, along with some other ingredients." "How much?" Dawson asked, reaching for the coins in his pocket. "Nothing. Call it payment for being a willing student." She pressed the jar into his hand, her fingers warm against his palm. "That doesn't seem fair. You could sell this. Then come by the boarding house sometime and buy something else. We always have inventory." Her smile was teasing now, lighter than before. "I will," he promised, and realized he meant it with an intensity that surprised him. He mounted carefully, keeping pressure off the mare's leg, and looked down at Natalie standing in her field of herbs, basket over her arm, the sun creating a halo around her dark hair. "Thank you, Miss Coleman." "Natalie," she corrected. "If I'm going to call you Dawson, you should call me Natalie." "Natalie," he repeated, liking the way it felt in his mouth. "I'll see you soon." The ride back to the Double R took twice as long at a walk, but Dawson found himself grinning like a fool the entire way. When he reached the ranch, his friend and fellow hand, Miguel Santos, took one look at his face and burst out laughing. "You look like you found gold in those hills," Miguel said, helping him stable the mare. "Better than gold," Dawson replied, carefully rubbing the liniment into his horse's leg. "I found someone who makes the whole territory make sense." 3 days later, Dawson rode into Lovelock on his one day off, his mare fully recovered and stepping lively. He had told himself he needed supplies, but Miguel's knowing look told him nobody was fooled. The boarding house was easy to find, a 3-story building painted white with green shutters and a wide front porch. A sign hanging from the eave read, "Coleman House Rooms and Remedies." Inside, the entryway smelled like herbs and beeswax. A woman who must have been Natalie's aunt stood behind a counter, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Help you?" "I'm looking for Natalie, madam. She helped me with my horse a few days back, and I wanted to thank her properly." "Maybe buy some more of that liniment." The woman's expression softened slightly. "You must be the cowboy she mentioned. Dawson, was it?" "Yes, madam. She's in the garden out back, working on a new batch of salves. Go on through." She gestured to a doorway that led deeper into the house. He found Natalie in a garden that took his breath away. Raised beds held dozens of different plants, all thriving despite the Nevada heat. She stood at a table under a canvas awning, grinding something in a mortar, her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied back with a ribbon. She looked up as he approached, and her face brightened in a way that made his heart race. "You came," she said, setting down the pestle. "I promised I would. The liniment worked perfectly. Rosa is good as new. Rosa, my mare." Seemed like she should have a name after all we have been through together. Natalie laughed, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm glad it helped. Let me show you what else we have." She walked him through the garden, pointing out plants at various stages of growth. Some were Nevada natives she had transplanted. Others were species her aunt had cultivated from seeds traded with travelers passing through. Behind the garden stood a small shed where they dried herbs and mixed their remedies. "This is incredible," Dawson said honestly. "You've created something really special here. My aunt created it. I'm just helping it grow." But he could see the pride in her eyes, the love for this work. "Would you let me take you to dinner?" The words came out before he could second-guess himself. "There's a restaurant on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, but the food is good." Natalie hesitated, and for a moment he thought she would refuse. Then she smiled. "I would like that. Let me clean up and tell my aunt." They ate at a small establishment run by a Chinese family, enjoying fried rice and vegetables that tasted nothing like ranch food. Dawson learned that Natalie had been in Lovelock for 10 years, that she loved to read, but the town's books were limited, that she had once wanted to travel to San Francisco, but the cost made it impossible. She learned that he had left Missouri after his father died, wanting to make his own way rather than take over the family farm, that he had worked on ranches across 3 states before settling at the Double R, that he sent money to his mother every month but her letters back were few and formal. "Do you miss it?" Natalie asked. "Missouri, I miss the greens sometimes. The way rain actually soaks into the ground instead of running off hard-packed earth. But Nevada has grown on me. There's an honesty to it. Nothing pretends to be what it is not." "That's a good way to put it." She took a sip of tea. "People back east think we are all outlaws and saloon girls out here. They don't understand that we are just trying to build lives, same as anywhere else." "Maybe better than anywhere else," Dawson said. "Nobody cares much about where you came from or who your people were. They care about whether you do your work and keep your word." As the evening deepened, Dawson walked Natalie back to the boarding house, his steps slow to stretch out the time. At the front porch, she turned to face him, the lamplight from inside casting a warm glow. "I had a wonderful time," she said softly. "So did I. Can I see you again?" "I'd like that very much." He reached for her hand, holding it gently. Her fingers were stained green from her work, and he found that beautiful. "Next Sunday, I could borrow a wagon and we could have a picnic." "That sounds perfect." He left Lovelock that night feeling like the world had shifted on its axis, everything suddenly brighter and more vivid. Miguel took one look at him when he returned to the bunkhouse and shook his head with a grin. "You are done for my friend." "Completely," Dawson agreed, and could not stop smiling. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that Dawson had never experienced before. Every Sunday, his one guaranteed day off, he would ride into Lovelock and spend the day with Natalie. Sometimes they would pack a lunch and ride out to her harvesting spots, where she continued teaching him about the plants, and he would help her carry her supplies. Other times they would walk through town, talking for hours about everything and nothing. She introduced him to her aunt, Martha Coleman, a formidable woman who warmed to him slowly but surely as she saw how he treated her niece. One Sunday, in late July, they rode out to a place Natalie called Willow Creek, though it was more of a trickle than a creek this time of year. Trees provided shade, and the sound of water over stones was soothing after the constant wind of the open range. "I've been thinking," Natalie said as they sat on a blanket, the remains of their lunch spread between them, "about expanding the garden. There are plants I could grow if I had more space. Chamomile and lavender for calming remedies, echinacea for fighting sickness, even some vegetables that we could sell. Your aunt would let you expand. She says she is getting too old to manage everything alone. She has been hinting that maybe I should take over more of the business side, not just the growing and mixing." Natalie plucked at the grass beside the blanket. "It's a lot of responsibility." "You can handle it," Dawson said with certainty. "I've watched you work. You have the knowledge and the dedication. People trust you." "You think so? I know so." He reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. This had become natural between them, these small touches that spoke of growing intimacy. "You could build something remarkable." She squeezed his hand. "What about you? Do you plan to work at the Double R forever?" It was a question he had been asking himself more and more. "I don't know. I like the work well enough, but I've been thinking lately that maybe I want something that's mine. Not a ranch necessarily, but something I'm building rather than just maintaining." "You could do anything you set your mind to," Natalie said, echoing his words back to him. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, listening to the creek and the birds. Dawson felt something loosen in his chest, a tightness he had not known he was carrying. With Natalie, he did not have to be anyone but himself. She did not expect grand gestures or flowery words. She seemed to value his quiet steadiness, his willingness to listen and learn. "Natalie," he said, turning to face her fully, "I need you to know that these past weeks have meant everything to me. I've never felt this way about anyone before." Her honey-colored eyes met his, serious and searching. "I feel the same way. When you are not here, I find myself thinking about what you would say about things I see, or planning what I want to show you next time. Is it too soon to say I'm falling in love with you?" His heart pounded as he asked, risking everything. "No," she whispered. "Because I'm falling in love with you too." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, her lips warm under his. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling, a little breathless, a little awed by the magnitude of what they were beginning. August brought brutal heat that shimmered off the rocks and turned the afternoons into an endurance test. Dawson worked longer hours helping move cattle to higher pastures where the grass had not completely burned away. It meant he was exhausted by Sunday, but nothing could keep him from Lovelock and Natalie. One particularly hot afternoon, he arrived to find the boarding house in an uproar. Martha stood on the porch wringing her hands while several townspeople gathered in the street. "What's wrong?" Dawson asked, dismounting quickly. "It's Mrs. Henderson," Martha said, her voice tight with worry. "She went into labor early and the baby is breech. Dr. Paulson is in Carson City for another 2 days. Natalie went to help, but this is beyond herb remedies." "Where are they?" "The Henderson place, 2 miles north of town." Dawson did not hesitate. "I'll go see if there's anything I can do." He found the small farmhouse easily, his horse lathered from the hard ride. Inside, he could hear a woman crying out in pain. Natalie met him at the door, her face pale but determined. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Your aunt told me what was happening. How can I help?" "I need you to ride to the Paiute camp 10 miles west. Ask for a woman named Wynma. Tell her Natalie Coleman sent you, and that we need her help with a breech birth. She has more experience with this than I do." "I'm on it." He was back on his horse before she finished speaking, pushing Rosa into a gallop despite the heat. He found the camp where Natalie had described, a collection of traditional homes and tents near a spring. The people watched him approach with caution, and he raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm looking for Wynma," he called out. "Natalie Coleman sent me. There's a woman in trouble, a baby that won't come right." An older woman stepped forward, her gray hair in long braids, her eyes sharp with intelligence. She said something in Paiute, then switched to English. "You are Natalie's cowboy. She has spoken of you." "Yes, madam. Please, will you come?" "Get my bag," she said to a younger woman nearby, then turned back to Dawson. "We go now." The ride back felt like it took forever, though Wynma kept pace expertly on a painted pony. When they reached the Henderson place, Natalie's relief was visible. "Thank God," she breathed, leading Wynma inside. Dawson stayed outside with Mr. Henderson, a nervous young man of about 25 who could not stop pacing. Other men from town had gathered, offering silent support. The sun set and the stars came out, and still they waited. Finally, near midnight, a baby's cry split the air. Everyone released a collective breath. Natalie emerged a few minutes later, exhausted but smiling. "A boy," she announced. "Both mother and baby are fine. Wynma saved them." Mr. Henderson rushed inside while the other men dispersed, heading home to their own families. Dawson waited as Natalie sank onto the porch steps, and he sat beside her. "You did good," he said quietly, putting an arm around her shoulders. "Wynma did good. I was terrified." She leaned against him, and he could feel her trembling slightly, the adrenaline wearing off. "But you knew who to call, and you kept Mrs. Henderson calm until help arrived. That matters." Wynma came out a while later, accepting payment in the form of supplies and dried goods. She looked at Dawson and Natalie sitting together and nodded approvingly. "You found a good one," she said to Natalie. "He did not hesitate to help." "I know," Natalie replied, smiling up at him. They rode back to Lovelock as dawn broke, Wynma heading back to her camp while Dawson and Natalie moved slowly, both exhausted. At the boarding house, Martha met them with coffee and breakfast, fussing over Natalie until she promised to rest. "You should sleep too," Natalie said to Dawson. "You have been up all night." "I will, but I wanted to make sure you were all right first." She kissed him, not caring that her aunt was right there watching. "I'm all right, better than all right. Thank you for coming when I needed you." "Always," he promised, and meant it with his whole heart. September brought cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn. The Double R began preparations for the final roundup of the year, which meant Dawson's Sundays were no longer guaranteed. He managed to get into town when he could, sometimes for only a few hours, but he and Natalie made the most of every moment. One evening, sitting in the boarding house parlor under Martha's watchful eye, Natalie showed him a letter she had received. "It's from a doctor in Virginia City," she explained. "He heard about our remedies and wants to place a large order for his practice. This could really help us expand." "That's wonderful," Dawson said, reading over the letter. The order was indeed substantial, enough to keep Natalie and Martha busy for weeks. "The problem is, we don't have enough of everything in stock. I would need to do major harvesting trips, and some of the plants he wants only grow in the mountains. It would take me away from town for days at a time." She looked troubled. "I don't like leaving Aunt Martha alone that long. She is strong, but she is 68 years old." "What if I helped you?" Dawson offered. "I could take some time off after the roundup. We could camp in the mountains and harvest what you need." "You would do that?" "Of course. This is important to you, which makes it important to me." Martha spoke up from her chair by the fireplace. "He's a keeper, this one. Don't let him get away." Natalie blushed but smiled. "I don't intend to." The roundup lasted 2 weeks, hard work from sunup to sundown, branding calves and sorting cattle. When it was done, Dawson was sore and tired but satisfied. He approached the ranch owner, Mr. Richardson, about taking 2 weeks off. "You have never asked for time before," Richardson said, a shrewd man in his 50s who missed nothing. "This about that herb girl in Lovelock. Her name is Natalie, and yes, sir. She needs help with a big harvest, and I told her I would do it." Richardson studied him for a long moment. "You planning on staying in my employ much longer, Quinn?" It was a fair question. "I'm not sure, sir. I like the work, but I've been thinking about what comes next." "Well, you have been a good hand. Never complained, always pulled your weight. Take your 2 weeks. When you come back, we'll talk about the future." Dawson and Natalie set out on a bright October morning, 2 horses loaded with camping supplies and empty crates for the harvest. Martha had packed enough food for a week, though they planned to hunt and supplement as they went. They headed into the Virginia mountains, following trails that Natalie knew from years of harvesting. The first night, they made camp in a grove of aspen trees, their leaves gold and trembling in the breeze. After a simple dinner of beans and bacon, they sat by the fire, shoulders touching, watching the flames dance. "I've never done anything like this," Natalie admitted. "Camping with just one other person, I mean. Usually I'm alone or with my aunt." "Are you nervous?" Dawson asked. "A little. But also excited. It feels like an adventure." "It is an adventure." He kissed her temple. "And I'm honored to be on it with you." They spent the next days working their way up the mountain, harvesting plants as they went. Natalie taught him how to properly cut and store each variety, how to leave enough behind for regrowth, how to identify the healthiest specimens. In the evenings, they would make camp and cook together, talking about their dreams and fears under the vast canopy of stars. "I want to write a book someday," Natalie confessed one night, "about all the plants and their uses, so the knowledge is not just passed mouth to mouth but written down for anyone to learn." "You should," Dawson encouraged. "You have the expertise and the passion. What about you? What do you really want?" He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I want land of my own, not a big ranch but enough to raise some cattle and horses. I want to build something lasting, something I could pass down someday." "To your children?" Natalie asked softly. "Yes. If I'm lucky enough to have them." He turned to look at her, the firelight playing across her face. "Natalie, I know we have not been courting long, but I need you to know my intentions are serious. I'm not playing games with your heart. I know you are not, and my heart is yours, Dawson." "Completely." He kissed her then, deeper than before, and felt her respond with equal passion. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you," he said. "I want to build that life with you, raise those children with you. I know it's soon, but I've never been more certain of anything." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you. I want all of that too." They held each other as the fire burned down, planning their future in whispered words and gentle touches. They would wait until spring to marry, giving them time to save money and make proper plans. Dawson would look for land they could afford, maybe something close enough to Lovelock that Natalie could still help her aunt with the business. They would build a house together, plant a garden, start their life. The harvest was successful, and they returned to Lovelock with crates full of plants and hearts full of joy. Martha took one look at them and knew immediately what had happened. "About time," she said, pulling Dawson into a rare hug. "Welcome to the family, son." The winter of 1874 was mild by Nevada standards, which meant Dawson could continue visiting Lovelock regularly. He had given his notice to the Double R, agreeing to stay on through the winter but planning to leave in early spring. Mr. Richardson had taken it well, even offering advice on buying land. Dawson spent his free time looking at properties, sometimes with Natalie, sometimes alone. They found a perfect piece in late February, 40 acres with a creek running through it, just 8 miles from Lovelock. It had a small cabin that needed work but was structurally sound, and plenty of flat land for building. The price was fair, and Dawson had saved enough for a down payment. "It's perfect," Natalie breathed when he showed it to her. "Look at all this space for gardens, and the creek means we will never run short of water." "There's enough pasture for a small herd," Dawson added. "I can start with maybe 20 head, build up slowly." They walked the property hand in hand, planning where everything would go. A barn here, an expanded garden there, maybe a greenhouse eventually so Natalie could grow year-round. The cabin would need to be enlarged before they married, at least one more room added and the roof repaired. "We can do this," Natalie said, her eyes shining. "We can really build this life." "We can," Dawson agreed, kissing her soundly. "Together." They married on a warm day in April in a small ceremony at the boarding house with Martha, Miguel, and a handful of friends in attendance. Natalie wore a simple blue dress and Dawson wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. The circuit preacher happened to be in town and performed the ceremony, his voice booming in the parlor. When Dawson kissed his bride, the small gathering cheered. Martha cried happy tears, and even Miguel looked a little misty. They had a simple reception with food that Martha and the other women had prepared, and then Dawson carried Natalie over the threshold of their newly renovated cabin as the sun set over their land. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn," he said, setting her down gently. "It still sounds strange," she admitted, smiling. "But I love it." Their first year of marriage was hard work but deeply satisfying. Dawson worked from dawn to dusk building up the ranch, starting with a small herd purchased from the Double R. Natalie established her gardens, even more extensive than what she had maintained in town, and continued making remedies that she sold through Martha's boarding house. They learned each other's rhythms, how to work together and when to give each other space. By their first anniversary, they had a thriving operation. The cattle were healthy and multiplying, the gardens produced abundantly, and they had started construction on a proper barn. More importantly, Natalie was pregnant, due in early winter. "I'm scared," she admitted one night as they lay in bed, Dawson's hand resting on her growing belly. "Scared something will go wrong." "I'm scared too," he said honestly. "But we will get through it together, and we have Wynma if we need her." Their son was born in December during the first snowfall of the season, with Wynma in attendance and Martha pacing nervously in the other room. It was a difficult birth, long and exhausting, but when Dawson heard his son's first cry, he wept with relief and joy. "He's perfect," Natalie said, exhausted but radiant as she held the tiny bundle. "Look at him, Dawson." The baby had dark hair and wrinkled skin and the most beautiful face Dawson had ever seen. "What should we name him?" "Daniel," Natalie said. "After my father." "Daniel Quinn," Dawson tested, liking the sound. "Welcome to the world, son." The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. They expanded the ranch gradually, never overextending but always growing. Natalie's reputation as an herbalist spread, and people came from surrounding towns to buy her remedies. She did eventually write her book, working on it in the evenings while Dawson would handle Daniel, and it was published by a small press in San Francisco. Daniel grew into a sturdy boy with his mother's curiosity and his father's steady nature. When he was 3, they welcomed a daughter, Emma, who had her father's dark eyes and her mother's determination. 2 years after that came another son, James, who was quieter than his siblings but fiercely loyal. Martha lived to see all 3 grandchildren, passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 80. They buried her in the Lovelock Cemetery, and Natalie grieved but found comfort in knowing her aunt had seen her happy and settled. The ranch prospered through good years and bad. There were droughts that tested them, winters that were harder than expected, cattle that were lost to disease or predators. But Dawson and Natalie faced it all together, their love deepening with each challenge overcome. On their 20th anniversary, they stood on the porch of their now large home, watching their children play in the yard. Daniel was 20, already talking about expanding into horse breeding. Emma was 17, interested in both ranching and her mother's herbal work. James was 15, already showing talent with cattle that impressed even his father. "You remember that morning?" Natalie asked, leaning against Dawson. "When you found me harvesting herbs and asked me to teach you?" "Every detail," Dawson replied, wrapping his arm around her waist. "I didn't know it then, but that was the day my life really began. Mine too." She turned to kiss him, still feeling the same flutter in her heart that she had felt as a young woman. "I love you, Dawson Quinn. I love you, Natalie Quinn, always and forever." They stood together as the sun set over their land, over the life they had built from hard work and hope, and a chance meeting on a Nevada hillside. 3 children, a thriving ranch, a legacy of healing knowledge, and a love that had only grown stronger with time. It was more than either of them had dared to dream in those early days, and they were grateful for every moment. Inside, they could hear the children laughing, arguing about something inconsequential. Soon they would call everyone to dinner, and the family would gather around the table Dawson had built with his own hands. They would eat food grown in Natalie's gardens, beef from their own cattle, bread baked in their oven. They would talk about the day's work and plans for tomorrow, the comfortable conversation of people who knew and loved each other completely. But for now, in this golden moment, Dawson and Natalie simply held each other and watched the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss all those years ago. Their story, which had begun with herbs and curiosity and a lame horse, had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. Miguel visited sometimes, now married himself with his own family. He always teased Dawson about that day he had come back to the bunkhouse looking like he had found something precious. "I told you that you were done for," Miguel would say, laughing. "You never stood a chance against that woman and her herbs." "Best thing that ever happened to me," Dawson would reply, never ashamed to admit it. The community they had built extended beyond their family. Ranch hands who worked for them were treated fairly and paid well. Natalie never turned away anyone who needed medicine but could not pay, though most insisted on trading goods or labor in return. The Quinn Ranch became known as a place of integrity and kindness, a legacy as important as the land itself. When Daniel announced his engagement to a young woman from Virginia City, a school teacher named Sarah, Natalie and Dawson were overjoyed. The wedding was held on the ranch, under the trees near the creek, and seeing their son pledge his life to his love brought back memories of their own wedding day. "We are getting old," Natalie said that night, watching the young people dance. "We are getting lucky," Dawson corrected. "Look at what we have. Look at what we built." Emma decided she wanted to study formally, to combine her mother's traditional knowledge with modern medicine. It was an ambitious goal, and not many schools accepted women, but they found one in San Francisco willing to take her. Letting her go was hard, but Natalie and Dawson were proud of her determination to forge her own path. James took over more of the ranch operations as Dawson's knees began to trouble him. It was a relief to have a son so capable and dedicated, someone who understood the land and the cattle as instinctively as Dawson himself did. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the house was peaceful, Dawson and Natalie would sit in their bedroom, the same room where their children had been born, and talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes they would pull out Natalie's book, now in its third printing, and she would read passages aloud while Dawson listened with pride. "You did it," he would say. "You preserved the knowledge." "We did it," she would correct. "None of this would have been possible without you." The truth was somewhere between, a partnership so complete that it was impossible to separate individual contributions. They had built their life together, stone by stone, plant by plant, day by day. The ranch that had started as 40 acres was now over 200. The small cabin had become a proper house with multiple bedrooms and a wide porch. The garden that Natalie had planted that first spring had expanded into something that supplied not just their family, but much of the surrounding area. When Daniel and Sarah welcomed their first child, a daughter named Martha after her great-grandmother, Dawson and Natalie became grandparents. Holding that tiny baby, seeing his son become a father, Dawson felt the circle completing in a profound way. "This is what it is all about," he said to Natalie as they sat together, watching Daniel hold his daughter with a mixture of terror and wonder. "This continuity, this passing on of love and knowledge and land. We are so blessed," Natalie agreed, tears in her eyes. "So very blessed." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. They celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, weathered losses and rejoiced in victories. Emma came home with her medical degree and opened a practice in Lovelock, combining her mother's herbal remedies with modern techniques to provide the best care possible. James married a rancher's daughter from the next county, and they built a house on the far edge of the Quinn property. On their 30th anniversary, all 3 children and 4 grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, the kind of joy that comes from family gathered together. As the evening wore on, Daniel stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us that love is the foundation of everything, that hard work and integrity matter, that the land will provide if you respect it, and that family is the greatest treasure. Thank you for building this life, for giving us this legacy. We love you." Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the sentiment, and Dawson had to swallow hard against the emotion rising in his throat. Natalie squeezed his hand, her eyes also bright with tears. Later, after everyone had gone to bed or home, Dawson and Natalie walked out to the spot where he had first shown her the property all those years ago. The moon was bright, casting silver light across the land, and they could see the barn, the house, the fences stretching into the distance. "I could not have imagined this," Natalie said quietly. "That morning when you found me harvesting herbs, I never dreamed we would build all this." "I knew," Dawson said. "Maybe not the details, but I knew you were going to change my life. I just had to convince you to let me be part of yours." "You did not have to convince very hard," she teased, then grew serious. "I cannot imagine my life without you, Dawson. You are my partner, my love, my home." "And you are mine," he replied, pulling her close. "Every day with you has been a gift." They stood together under the stars, older now but no less in love, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had created. 3 children who were making their own marks on the world, grandchildren who would carry the family forward, a ranch that would endure for generations. And most importantly, a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. The morning light that had illuminated their first meeting had given way to the silver glow of countless nights together, and Dawson knew that he would be grateful for every single one. He had been a cowboy looking for purpose when he found Natalie kneeling among the herbs, and she had shown him not just what each plant could do, but what love could do, what partnership could build, what a life of meaning looked like. "Show me what each one does," he had said that first morning, curious about plants. What he had really been asking, though he did not know it then, was for her to show him how to live fully, how to love completely, how to build something that mattered. And she had shown him all of that and more, day after day, year after year, until their lives were so intertwined that they had become one story, one legacy, one enduring love. As they walked back to the house, their steps slower now but still in sync, Dawson sent up a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever forces had led him down that slope on a morning in 1873. His horse going lame had seemed like bad luck at the time, but it had been the greatest blessing of his life, bringing him to the woman who would become his everything. Inside, they could hear the sounds of their grandchildren settling down for the night, giggles and whispers floating through the walls. Emma was reading them a story, her voice gentle and patient. Daniel and James sat on the porch, smoking cigars and talking about expanding the herd next spring. Sarah and James's wife, Clara, cleaned up from dinner, their quiet conversation punctuated by laughter. This was the life they had built, not just a ranch or a business, but a family, a community, a place where love was the foundation and hard work was the structure and hope was the roof keeping everything safe and dry. Every fence post Dawson had driven into the ground, every plant Natalie had nurtured to life, every meal shared and story told had contributed to this moment of complete and utter contentment. "I think we did all right," Dawson said, settling into his favorite chair with a satisfied sigh. "Better than all right," Natalie corrected, curling up beside him. "We did wonderfully." And as the house quieted around them, their family safe and happy under the roof they had built together, Dawson Quinn held his wife close and knew that his Wild West adventure had led him to the greatest treasure of all. A love that transformed everything, a partnership that could weather any storm, and a life full of purpose and joy. From that morning in the Nevada hills, when he had asked a beautiful woman to teach him about herbs, to this night surrounded by the fruits of their labor, the journey had been everything he could have hoped for and more. The story of the cowboy and the herb woman became local legend over time, told to grandchildren and great-grandchildren as an example of how love could transform lives and build legacies. But for Dawson and Natalie, it was simply their life, lived fully and gratefully, together until the very end of their days, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simplest of encounters and a willingness to say yes to whatever comes next.